The following content is intended solely for informational purposes. Views expressed by hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily represent those of Alea Research, its affiliates, or any organizations with which participants are associated. Nothing discussed should be construed as financial, legal, or investment advice. Viewers are encouraged to conduct their own analysis and consult professional advisors before making investment decisions. Welcome to a new MarketCap episode. MarketCap is where funds and firms provide their insight on their activities, sector, and the markets at large to you, our audience of institutional investors and traders, as well as industry professionals. I'm Stefano, Director, Institutional Services at Alea Research, and with me I have McAndrew Rudisill, CEO and Chairman at ETHZilla. Andrew, welcome to the show. You're CEO and Chairman at ETHZilla, and in your most recent move, you guys acquired a 15% stake in Liquidity.io, a regulated Ethereum L2 marketplace for tokenized private assets, including structured credit, private equity, and real-world assets. Pleasure to finally have you with us. Before we talk about ETHZilla real quick, I always like to get a sense for the person that we're talking with. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how it eventually led to your role as CEO and Chairman at ETHZilla?
Yeah, Stefano, it's nice to meet you, and thanks for having me on the show. My background is I've been really in private equity for the last 20 years. I've built and sold a variety of different businesses in multiple different spaces. Have been in the aerospace and defense industry for the last couple of years. Sold those businesses. I've done a lot in real estate, in natural resources, and then started investing in digital assets in 2010. Started buying Bitcoin, became very interested in the entire ecosystem. In the late sort of 2020, 2021, spent a lot of time doing research on Ethereum, was thinking about all the application use cases for Ethereum, started investing in ETH, and then really digging deeper into the various L2 protocols and how they worked. And then with my family office in the last 2 years, we made an investment in a company called Ethereum L2s. And that business was set up to focus on bringing structured credit onto Ethereum network L2s. And that was so it was to partner with private equity funds who I'd done a lot of business with, partnering with large financial institutions like banks and other financial conduits that issued structured credit securities so that we could tokenize them onto L2. Because I thought the sort of biggest use case for Ethereum in our lifetime was actually going to be the transition of everything that goes on TradFi should ultimately go on the Ethereum network. And I think you're starting to see that effectuated in the marketplace. And so with that investment in Ethereum L2s, met the partners at Electric Capital, who were also a big investor in Ethereum L2s. And we started to talk about the benefits of having a large pool of ETH on a singular balance sheet. And then came up with the idea in the beginning of 2025 to start looking for a way to go about doing that in a public marketplace so that we could use that ETH to invest in L2 protocols to generate yield on the ETH, but ultimately get ourselves positioned so that we can tokenize real world assets, have relationships with the largest L2 node validators and liquid staking protocols so that we can collateralize those assets. And it starts to create an ecosystem where a marketplace starts to get built around this transition to Ethereum. And that leads into sort of why we made this investment in Liquidity.io recently at ETHZilla, because our focus is bringing these real world assets onto Ethereum L2s.
That makes perfect sense. I guess that's a perfect summary of what I knew about ETHZilla from, let's say, the last year or so. But
Yeah.
as you illustrate right here, the next move is this acquisition of Liquidity, which, given the context you just gave us, makes perfect sense, right? And I've heard you describe this partnership with Liquidity as foundational for ETHZilla's next phase. Can you touch a bit more on that? What makes a regulated platform like Liquidity strategically important for where you're heading with ETHZilla?
Yeah, so I've been talking with Austin and Eric Choi, who are the founders of Liquidity, for the last 2 years as they've been building the platform. And It has taken a long time to get all the various regulatory licenses that are required to do this. Prior to the current administration being in office in the US, it just wasn't possible to bring these assets onto a regulated exchange. Liquidity received their SEC digital ATS license in the last year. They became a FINRA registered broker dealer so that we could trade in stocks. They became a transfer agent, which took a long time. And then we spent a lot of time and money working through how to build a multi-party computation custody platform, so like an MPC wallet platform, so that users on the platform can hold the various types of securities that we list on the platform. And then the last very important piece is KYC. These exchanges for these private assets mainly require that accredited investors are allowed onto the exchanges. So we've built a pretty robust KYC platform with facial recognition through Simplicity, which actually is currently being used by the TSA as well for facial recognition. And that is what gives us access to, making sure that people who are coming onto the exchange are who they say they are, and determine that they're accredited investors. So there's a lot of steps that had to get jumped through to get to the point where we could create a marketplace for all these private assets. And we're actually there now. And then the next step is bring all the assets into the marketplace. So Liquidity is in the process of bringing all digital sort of crypto assets as we know them today, like you can trade on Coinbase on. They have a partnership in place with RF Lafferty already, which kicks in the year here in the fourth quarter to trade pre-IPO equity. So think about like shares of SpaceX and Anduril, all these big private companies that you hear about. You'll get access on this exchange to go to trade those assets. Where we become most interested at ETHZilla is similar to what you heard about the securitized deal yesterday, where they're going to go public through a counter vehicle. We now have a platform where we can take physical assets that generate cash flow in the real world with long-term contracts. We can tokenize them and we can put them on the exchange, and then we can allow people to buy fractions of them. And because we have the transfer agent in the exchange, one of the main reasons why you would want to buy these assets is because they can produce outsized yield relative to what you can get access to in the public equity markets today, or what you can get access to in the crypto markets via investing in L2s. And so, we're talking about yield profiles of between, call it 8 and 20% on a recurring basis. And because of that NPC wallet setup and the transfer agent, when you own these tokens, you can then get paid your yield on a monthly basis in USDC or US dollars. I'll stop there because there's quite a few other points we can get through, but I think this is where the entire world is heading, and that's where we're leading the charge.
Agreed. And that's definitely a very, very attractive offering, right? I'm curious mostly about what these assets specifically look like. Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, it's a gigantic marketplace, and I think you got to break it into pieces. I think the easiest thing to understand is, like, let's start with what is currently securitized on Wall Street. You've got auto loans, you've got credit card loans, consumer finance loans. These are packaged in bundles of $200 million to $500 million and sold to institutional investors in packages through traditional investment banks. But most retail investors and most accredited investors don't get direct access to these products. And what I'd say on the other side is, on the institutional side, the institutions that do hold them, a lot of their funds are very long life funds, and the LPs don't have a lot of liquidity in those funds. So putting the funds up onto an exchange where people can get access to them actually creates liquidity for the LPs in the funds, as well as direct access for the investors. Now, the other thing on the real world side, which is interesting to talk about, is there's heavy equipment, commercial real estate, natural resources, all things that have very long tail cash flow. Oftentimes I have, long contracts with very credit worthy counterparties. And we are focused right now on bringing those types of specific assets into individual tokens that are then L2 Ethereum tokens, produce cash flow, and then you can actually use them as collateral in the Ethereum network once we wrap them in. And this is where I think the world really starts to change, because you take something that is basically totally illiquid and you make it liquid and you make it accessible. And by doing that, you're opening up a multi-trillion-dollar market in multiple different verticals.
Yeah.
And then the last step is, I think, the whole private capital market, and I touched on this, private equity funds, pre-IPO equity, which we're already doing with Lafferty, private real estate funds, all have a need and an interest, I think, in listing on these exchanges. And so what we're doing is just providing them access to a legal structure that's been vetted to create the token, a software structure of how to build the token, and then how to pay out the yield on the token, which is actually relatively complex, and then a ledger of how to keep track, like you would with a stock, of everyone who owns the token and their relevant percentage ownership in the token. And then you also create a way for capital to come into the token directly, almost on a daily basis, like you would have bought. So it's multi-directional flow on an asset base. And that is going to create, it's just going to shift what is a huge market into a liquid, more traded market.
Yeah, that's clear. You illustrate very clearly how this is very interesting for both sides. On one hand, you're providing the market with access that they didn't have before. And at the same time, you're providing liquidity to these asset holders that typically had a problem in doing so. I'm curious, how would that work before a platform like Liquidity and you guys facilitating this? How did this typically work, or still does, in the traditional financial markets? Like,
It,
say,
it's a totally private transaction is how it works. I mean, you go through a process. You, as an investor, you fill out a lot of paperwork. You make a
yeah,
decision. You make an investment in a fund. Typically, I'm talking from just kind of a large LP side of the equation, and then you put your capital in, and you're not going to get it back for 7 or 10 years. And so you're either getting a yield, or if you're in private equity, you're waiting for the investments to be effectuated. You're getting your capital drawn down, and then you're waiting as the investments are executed to get your capital back over a long period of time. And for the real, like the physical assets we talked about, there's public companies that own these physical assets that you can kind of go and buy their stock, and that's a way to get exposure to various assets that we're talking about. But you can't physically go buy the assets. If the companies are generating the cash flow, and you're making a bet on the cash flow multiple of the equity rather than the cash yield directly of the asset. And what we're doing is taking it down to the asset level and saying you can just buy this asset directly if you want to hold it and benefit from the yield of it. So there's a really wide aperture of the types of things that can be listed on this exchange. And I think Zilla's got the sauce put together where we can see the assets being put on the exchange. We can create the tokens. We can manage the capital streams of capital coming into the tokens, and then manage this large portfolio of token creation.
That's fascinating. That's going to be revolutionary. And that your illustration further underlines the amounts of friction that currently exist in this market, and that will all be removed through introducing this platform. That's very clear. Okay. In general, where are we in this whole process, right? Not just with liquidity, but like in general, like where are we seeing traction so far? Where's institutional adoption really starting to appear first?
Okay.
Or,
Yeah,
there yet?
great question. So here we are in 2025. There's about $2 trillion assets that have been tokenized. We'll call it 80% of that is on Ethereum-based L2s right now. The probably best examples are BlackRock has the BUIDL tokenized treasury fund, so you can go buy that fund and get effectively U.S. Treasury yield. That's JP Morgan's developed this Connexus blockchain. Galaxy Digital just launched Galaxy One. Figure has their YLDC token, which gives you access to HELOCs. So each of these are kind of individual marketplaces, and they touch on the points that I made of, they're basically wrapping up existing credit that you would typically access through a money market fund at your bank. and allowing someone to just buy it in a token format. And why this matters is because a lot of the capital in the digital asset marketplace is actually international. And why I think Ethereum is so important is it's effectively a proxy for people internationally to get access to US dollars. And that is why a lot of the stable coins have been built on Ethereum L2s. People start buying Ethereum. They also then start saving in USDC and US dollar tether because they want to get out of the higher inflation rate currencies or get exposure to US dollars. And then the next step, I think, in this evolution is globally, you give people access to a marketplace where they can get access to millions of different products. They can pick the yield, they can pick the risk profile, what they want on these assets. And effectively, you become a large digital asset manager that's focused on Ethereum L2s. And that in turn will be very beneficial with the price of ETH because you're going to need a lot more compute to have all these various L2s running at all the same time. And it all eventually converges to the ETH superhighway. But it's why we are focused on the token side and the L2 investment side much more than really the ETH. That it's kind of the oil that drives the business to be connected to the L2s.
Got it. It also sounds very much like a growing the pie type endeavor, as in the way you illustrated, right? To me, that sounds like, okay, now it becomes very attractive for people currently not involved with crypto yet to start getting involved as well. It's no longer just like meme coins and NFTs and okay, sure, maybe some on-chain yield products, but that are kind of, yeah, pretty out there on the risk curve. But now
Yeah.
we're talking about like really like you said, like very reputable companies that are very credit worthy and that should really widen the scope for the interest for digital assets in general. Is that part of the vision as well?
Yeah, Stefano, you nailed it. I mean, that's what it is. We believe that the tokenization of global assets it's gonna move from 2 trillion today to these numbers sound enormous, but probably more than $15 trillion by 2030 is the projections. And I could see it being bigger than that. And I equate this a lot to, you look at the history of the commodities market and then the transition of the various commodity exchanges to ICE, and it all became one partnership with a lot of different financial institutions to create ICE. And then you look at this, like how the stock markets evolved. There was a stock market in almost every single town in the United States. And what do we have today? We got 2 gigantic exchanges that have rolled up all those different exchanges in all those different cities. And where we are
Yep.
now in this world is there's going to be different marketplaces that get created for these assets. We are one of very few holders in the United States of all the licenses and technical requirements to do this. And so I think it becomes a large marketplace just because of the adoption rate ramps up. And instead of just tapping into the US, we're tapping into a whole marketplace with what we're setting up. And so to your point, it's not a meme coin. It's all real stuff.
Exactly. Man, that's exciting. And that was definitely a very, very strategic move. Obviously, they got all the right licenses, etc. Um, Wrapping up here a little bit, what is next for you guys right now?
Yeah. So we're going to prove it. We're going to tokenize a real world asset that typically gets securitized. And then we're going to distribute the cash flow out to the investors in the token. And ETHZilla is going to create it. And then we're going to do it over and over and over again. We have multiple different business lines that we've looked at, and they're all going to be L2 Ethereum based. And then the next step is we're going to make those tokens so that they are collateral when they sit on the exchange, just like when you hold Google in your equity account at Morgan Stanley and they give you an LTV release on your portfolio margin line of credit on that equity. Same setup. So suddenly your private assets are going to become much more liquid. And I think it's actually going to change the world.
Yeah, it is definitely like it has a lot of downstream implications.
Yeah, and I hope that we've had very good reception from the financial community, both on the buy side and on the sell side. I think a lot of banks are looking at how to get involved in this. A lot of fund managers are focused on what's the best way to do it. it feels like to me we're already so far down the track with Ethereum that it's going to be the primary beneficiary of most of this.
Excellent. Can you can you share with us some alpha about like potentially the first asset you're going to tokenize?
It's a great. It's like I'd like to keep that one closer to the vest. We've got a few
Yeah,
that we've been working on for literally a couple of years, and it's taken a lot of programming time and legal work to get to that point. But we're laser focused on execution, and that's our plan.
that sounds excellent. I can't wait. Looking
Yeah.
forward to those announcements. Um, yeah, we're in closing,
I think the last thing we should just mention though is
please.
recently we made the decision to buy back quite a bit of stock in the open marketplace, and we publicly announced that earlier this week. And I think it differentiates and shows what we are focused on at ETHZilla. So we do have a lot of Ethereum. We love holding Ethereum because it helps us make investments in L2s. But we were presented with an opportunity in the market where our assets, both our cash and our ETH, and I think it was north of $500 million in total assets, were trading at less than $250 million in market cap. And so when someone gives me an opportunity to go buy back cash and ETH at a 50% discount, it just made financial sense to sell some of our Ethereum and go into the marketplace and buy back our assets. And I can't reiterate enough. We are focused on the equity at ETHZilla. We are all corporate finance people, and Ethereum is very important to us. But the number one thing that's important to us is execution of this RWA tokenization platform, and then performance of our stock. And so I do think ultimately people are going to focus on our revenue growth. They're going to focus on our user growth. They're going to focus on everything that you focus on when you're looking at a high growth technology business. And Ethereum is going to be a part of it, but it's just going to be part of the balance sheet. So we're not singularly focused on buying more Ethereum. We are very focused on making investments in these RWA tokens and in L2 platforms on Ethereum. And I think that differentiates us quite a bit from everyone else in the field. And over time, I think you're going to see it show up in the cash flow pretty quickly.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does set you guys apart, and it is also what you just said is very illustrative of on a strategic level. You have so many factors to balance, right? To juggle in a way. So, all right, I commend you guys for that. Where
Yeah, look,
can
I think we're in a very young marketplace right now, and a lot of these companies are new. But I think that you're going to see a lot of differentiation over time between people who just hold digital assets and then people who are actually using them to create value.
absolutely? I think the first case, well, there was a lot of it was it was running hot, let's say, earlier this year, but I think it has become clear that just that in and of itself is not a viable strategy. It's not going to be a viable strategy for long, at least. So you guys are leading the charge in that sense.
I agree completely.
Excellent. Where can people best go to find out more about you or ETHZilla, learn more?
Yeah, I mean, our website's a good spot, ETHZilla.com. It's got all of our news releases, our press release, all of our filings. And then we're at a lot of conferences over the next couple of weeks, speaking and meeting with institutional investors almost every single week from here through till Thanksgiving. I'm going somewhere to talk.
Damn, going on the road. All right. That's
Okay.
great. Thank you, Andrew McAndrew, for these insights. It was a very insightful conversation, very informative, very instructive, very exciting for what's on the horizon and the possibilities that this is gonna give all of us and the markets at large. So thank you for shedding that light.
Thank you, Stefano, for hosting us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Also want to thank everyone tuning in. Always a pleasure. If you enjoyed this, you can access more insights in the following ways. For in-depth reports, many of them publicly accessible, you can join our research platform. For protocol and market summaries and highlights, you can subscribe to our newsletter. And for daily news updates, you can join our Telegram channel. All the links are in the bio. And of course, tune in next time. We release a new episode every week, so follow us on X and YouTube. This was MarketCap, where funds and firms provide their insight on their activities, sector, and the markets at large to you, our audience of institutional investors and traders, as well as industry professionals. See you on the next MarketCap.